We're gonna be taking a look at one of the best 1440p price to performance GPUs around, and was one of the first ones to actually hit its MSRP after the GPU crisis had finally ended. Today, we're taking a look at the 6700 XT. Specifically, we're gonna be taking a look at the Asrock Challenger 6700 XT. And we're also gonna be overclocking it, and we're gonna be running it with that overclock to make sure it's stable. So let's get right into it. So let's actually start with something a bit interesting about the GPU that I have today. For one, this one's a non-OC variant. Hey, I know it's been a long time since we have one of those on the channel, but there's a good reason. I actually bought this GPU at MSRP, which was a magical place that did not exist for like a year. So I was not expecting very much, and very much I did not receive. We got a plain old 2-slot GPU with 2 fans, a cooler that feels a little light, but probably isn't too bad. Does have a nice backplate on it. Its smaller profile actually looks pretty good in the case. And aesthetically, it's almost all black finish, really does work. Additionally, because it's a 2-slot card that only requires 2 8-pin connectors, it's actually really easy to slot right in and just get going with it. Now, general impressions of this card right off the bat were, well, generally positive. That being said, this card does have a nasty amount of coil whine, and it is very obvious, especially in the mostly quiet system that I have, which is Mini Nova, which is my all blacked out with a Noctua NHD15, all air cooled system that generally runs very quiet. Now, we did start to benchmark it from here, and well, things were a bit unusual. In fact, it was actually scoring below average. So I turned to overclocking right off the bat. Now, I did try using AMD's automatic overclocking, which worked, and it brought us closer to average, but it didn't quite get us all the way there. Instead, I downloaded MSI Afterburner. Well, actually just really enabled it because it was already on the PC, and took the sliders and moved them all to the right. That's right. I could have broken this card so badly. I even posted it on Twitter. Guess just a plug to maybe follow me on Twitter if you ever want to see some of these behind the scenes moments. Point is, I did actually overclock this, and the overclock did hold, which is the ridiculous part. And that brought us to average and above average sometimes. This card's a bit shaky. It all depends on the temperature of the room and the roll of the dice. Let's go ahead and start with 3D Mark, because we had a lot of variance and some really weird results. We're gonna point out Time Spy, which actually had so much variance in it run to run that I am gonna talk about both the average score and our peak score. So our average score was actually close to the average of the GPU, even when overclocked, which was a 12,700. In fact, 12,779 was generally where we sat. Now our max score though was actually a 13,058, which we did on a pretty random run. And I'm not exactly sure what the run-to-run variance was to get us there, even though the overclock hadn't changed. More importantly, I do want to talk about Port Royal because, well, while it is a benchmark that is specialized for ray tracing, I do want to mention that this one tested higher than average on that one specifically. So we ended up actually getting a 1611 on that one, which honestly, according to the 3D Mark, was above average and in the good category, or the great category. It was in the great category. Moving on, we're gonna go ahead and talk about Unigen. Unigen, we went ahead and scored a 8,740 on its Heaven benchmark, and superposition a 16,628. So it does seem that performance-wise, this thing is sitting somewhere above a 5700 XT, above a 3060, and around like a 3070, which is great because, well, that's exactly where it should be because, well, 5700, 6700, 3727. They're all supposed to go in pretty much that direction. Gaming wise, we actually have a big chart that we're gonna throw in at the end. Borderlands 3, which we ran in both the benchmark and gameplay, had a pretty significant average on it of being 80 at its absolute max settings and 85 during gameplay, and then 90 and 95 on Epic. That is pretty good for this game because the actual higher fidelity versions of this game have proven to be the downfall of several other GPUs on this channel. Phantasy Star Online New Genesis actually got the highest score we've seen yet. Well, this is the most powerful GPU we've seen yet, so I guess that's not too surprising, of 110 frames per second. And then Forza Horizon 5 actually recommends that we run at the ultra settings and ran with about 115 frames per second during the benchmark and 140 frames per second during actual gameplay. Of course, this was measured throughout the game. We drove a sports car through one of the more populated areas just to get that number. Overall, you can see that the gaming performance of this is not half bad. And when it comes to VR performance, I am happy to say that it can confidently run everything a Rift S could possibly run at 80 frames per second pretty well. That includes VR Chat, Half-Life Alyx, Zenith, Beat Saber, pretty much anything you could want to run on your VR device. This thing can run handily and easily. And the VR Mark benchmarks do back us up here. If you want to take a look at this, you can pause here and take a look at our big game breakdown. This is every game we tested on this GPU. And as you can see, it can easily handle 1440p content at a price that's actually pretty reasonable. So my final thoughts on this GPU are actually that it is great. And at its current price, it is amazing. And if you can get it at even lower than MSRP, it is a great card for you to introduce into your system. The problems come from the weird behaviors that I've seen when it comes to run-to-run variants in 3D Mark, overclocks, and more importantly, the coil whine. That coil whine is rather obnoxiously loud, so even adding a water cooler would not change it very much. Even more so, I do suspect that the reason that this GPU is performing below average on average is because of the GPU shortage. You see, when the GPU shortage was happening, Asrock, Asus, Gigabyte, everybody was making the high-end OC cards and were saving these like lower bin ones to be sold off in bulk to probably miners or, you know, non-consumers. Well, this is a theory, and this is allegedly, that I suspect that once these cards started to hit the market and actually get to consumers who are actually 3D Mark benchmarking it, we're gonna see that they're gonna test a little bit lower than what was considered average a couple of months ago. That being said, you can get back to those numbers simply by overclocking, which is, well, exactly what the manufacturers did. They strapped a heavier cooler on it and they overclocked it. Its understated look actually isn't too bad in specifics, and as a GPU, I would very much recommend this. Now, if you are having some issues with your drivers, I do have a driver fix video that came out about 2 years ago that seems to fix most of the issues. And more importantly, if you are considering this GPU, I would recommend having a beefier power supply on hand, just because overcurrent is an issue. Gamers Nexus actually talked about that more recently with this generation of GPUs, including the NVIDIA ones as well. More importantly, this GPU does support a lot of the features that will be implemented going forward. For example, FSR 2.0 will work properly on this GPU, and things like ray tracing, while not necessarily their absolute best, do work. Forza Horizon supposedly actually has ray tracing, and I'm not entirely sure how it works because it doesn't seem to really affect the performance all that much. And it might just be that it's a good implementation for AMD GPUs. But that's where we're gonna end today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, consider giving it a like, commenting, subscribing. Would you buy this GPU? Do you have a 6700 XT? Do you have a 6800 XT? That one's in my crosshairs next, along with a 3080. You know, I have what I would want next, but let's just say the next generation probably is gonna start before I can afford it. So yeah, and I do really wanna see how this GPU performs in comparison to something like a Valve Index. While I don't have any immediate plans to get one, I would like to at some point. And I would love to see how this thing performs VR-wise on that headset. But other than that, that is where we're gonna end it. Thank you so much for watching. Wolfie, out.